Okay guys, so welcome back to my YouTube channel. So for today's video, we will continue the discussion of cost accounting and control, an introduction, part 3, wherein we will discuss the third learning objective, which is the enumeration of the cost concept and classification. So let's start. Okay, so let's discuss some of the cost concepts that you will be encountering in this course. So para mas madali, sineparate ko po sa financial accounting and si management accounting. As we discussed on my prior videos, di ba, financial accounting, ang cost accounting po ay nagsusupplement ng data kay financial accounting to support its external operation such as the preparation of the general purpose financial statements. And also, cost accounting supports management accounting in order to support the management needs to make their short-term and long-term decision. So, ang may encounter po natin cost sa financial accounting ay ito po. We have the product cost, manufacturing cost. Then, under product cost and manufacturing cost, we have the direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Under factory overhead, we have indirect materials, indirect labor, and factory overhead. Then sa ilalim, we have the period cost. Under ng period cost, we have selling expense, administrative expense, finance cost, and others. So, cost accounting also supplements data to management accounting for management needs for their short-term and long-term decision, as I said earlier. So, since hindi po sila sumusunod or they are not mandated to follow external standards such as the IFRS or IAS, so they have their own standard on their own internally. So, ibig sabihin po, yung cost concepts nila ay flexible and progressing. So, ibig sabihin, kanya-kanya po sila ng cost concept na ginagamit. Pero yung most commonly used na cost concept na ginagamit sa management accounting ay ito po. So, pwede po daw i-classify si cost sa management accounting as to the behavior of the cost itself. So, it can be variable cost, fixed cost, semi-variable, semi-fixed, and step cost. And also, it can be classified based on planning. So, meron dyan standard cost, opportunity cost, relevant cost, sunk cost, and controllable cost. So, for this video, ito lang muna yung i-focus natin kasi sa totoong buhay or sa management accounting nyo, mas marami pang cost na i-discuss natin. Para lang hindi tayo ma-overwhelm sa mga cost information, so ito lang muna yung ating i-focus sa video na ito. Okay, so let's discuss in details the cost concepts under financial accounting. So, according to the last slide, so meron tayong dalawa. We have the product cost and the period cost. So, for this slide, let us talk about the product cost. So, as we all know, product cost is the cost of the product, was commonly known as manufacturing cost. So, ibig sabihin daw, lahat ng cost na na-incur natin sa factory or sa production ng product, considered po yan as under product cost. So, under product cost, we have three components. So, yung isa, we have the direct materials, and we have the direct labor and the factory overhead. So, isa-isahin po natin sila para mas madali nating maintindihan. So, let's say we are into manufacturing of furnitures. So, sa manufacturing ng furnitures, ano ba yung direct materials doon? So, ang direct materials doon is yung ating wood or yung log, di ba? So, pag sinabi nating direct materials, dapat po, it can be directly attributed or traceable doon sa mismong finished product natin. Which is sa furniture o kanyari table, nakikita nyo talaga yung wood doon or yung log sa finished product. Kaya ang log po ay considered yan as direct materials. So another component of product cost or manufacturing cost is what we call the direct labor. So direct labor, these are the factory workers directly related to the production of the product. So tandaan nyo po, please note the word direct because kailangan yung labor ay directly attributed doon sa product. So meaning, sila mismo yung humahawak doon sa production ng product mismo. So example po niyan is yung factory worker dedicated for the assembly of the product, which is the furniture. Then last, we have the factory overhead. Ang factory overhead po, meron po yung three components. So yung isang component niyan is yung indirect materials. Indirect materials is considered as factory overhead, not direct materials, because indirect materials are materials needed to produce the product but cannot be traced in a feasible manner. So example po ng indirect materials, ito po yung mga pako na ginagamit sa pag-produce ng furniture. Actually, yung pako, nakikita natin siya sa finished product, pero hindi kasi siya kayang i-trace in a feasible manner wherein i-trace natin siya by pieces ng pako. Kasi alam naman natin ang bentahan ng pako ay by kilos. So dahil by kilos yan, hindi practical na bilangin mo yung pako na ginagamit per product. So kaya po ang pako, although nakikita siya doon sa ating finished product, considered po yan as indirect materials. So another example of indirect materials, we have the cleaning materials needed to the factory, such as yung ginagamit po ng mga janitor doon sa ating factory, yung panlinis. Then at the same time, pwede din po dyan yung rugby na ginagamit. Kung gumagamit ng rugby ang business para sa pagdikit-dikit ng mga kanilang produkto, consider din po yun as indirect materials. Another part of factory overhead, we have the indirect labor. So indirect labor, these are the labors incurred in the manufacturing which are not directly related to the product. Pero manufacturing costs yan. Example po niyan is yung salary ng supervisors, di ba? Although ang supervisors nasa factory, they are not directly related to the production of the product. Kasi alam naman natin yung mga supervisor, hindi sila yung nagmamanufacture mismo ng product, they are just supervising the factory laborers. Yung factory laborers considered as direct labor, then yung supervisor naman considered po yan as indirect labor. So basically, yung factory worker na dedicated dun sa pag-produce ng product directly, considered yan as direct labor, wherein yung supervisor na nagsusupervise dun sa worker, since hindi sila directly related dun sa production ng product, so considered po yun as indirect labor under factory overhead. So another example po niyan is yung mga janitors dun sa ating factory. Although ang janitors po ay ang work nila ay maglinis ng factory, hindi po sila considered as direct labor because they are not directly related to the production of the product. So naglilinis lang sila para malinis po yung working area ng ating mga factory workers. In that case, yung janitors na sa factory, considered po yun as indirect labor under factory overhead. Then the last part ng ating factory overhead under manufacturing cost is what we call the other factory overhead. Other factory overhead, these are the costs incurred in the manufacturing of the product na hindi natin kayang i-trace doon sa apat na nabanggit natin. Example niyan is electricity ng factory. Ang electricity sa factory natin is considered as a factory overhead. Bakit? Ang test lang naman yan, itetest mo lang, considered ba siya as manufacturing cost? If the answer is yes, then ang next question mo, considered ba siya as labor or materials? Kung hindi siya considered as labor or materials, automatic, ilalagay po natin siya sa other factory overhead. Example nga nun, yung electricity dedicated doon sa ating factory site. So, another example niyan is we have the depreciation of the factory equipment. So, depreciation of factory equipment is also considered as part of the manufacturing cost kasi ginamit mo yung equipment doon mismo sa factory. So, alam naman natin, ang equipment ay hindi siya related sa direct materials kasi hindi naman natin siya kino-convert into other product. Hindi rin naman siya direct labor kasi hindi naman siya tao. So, dahil hindi siya materials, hindi siya labor, so ang tapunan po natin is yung other factory overhead. Another example niyan is yung rent ng factory. If we're just renting the space doon sa ating production process, consider din po yung expense na yon as manufacturing cost na ilalagay natin sa other factory overhead. So para hindi kayo mahirapan, ang ano lang diyan, ang trick lang diyan, i-classify niyo muna yung isang expense kung product cost ba siya or period cost. Alam naman natin kapag product cost factory cost 'yan. Pag hindi siya factory cost, doon siya sa period cost. So kapag factory cost siya or product cost, doon mo pa lang siya i-classify kung direct materials, direct labor and factory overhead. Ang first rule, identify mo muna, materials ba yan? So kung materials, ang next question, direct or indirect? Kasi kapag direct, ilalagay mo po sa direct materials. Kapag indirect, ilalagay mo sa indirect materials under factory overhead. The next question, labor ba yan? Pag sinabi mong labor, dapat po tao ang gumagawa. So i-classify mo muna kung direct labor, i-classify mo under direct labor. Kung indirect labor, i-classify mo sa factory overhead. So kung hindi mo kayang i-classify materials or labor, wala na po tayong ibang pwedeng puntahan kundi yung cash basis natin na manufacturing cost component which is the other factory overhead. So, ayun lang naman po yung cost component ng manufacturing cost. However, kailangan meron din tayong classification within this group kasi. So, I just wanted to discuss with you guys, 'di ba? So, another classification of product cost, ito pong tatlo. We have the direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. In some cases po kasi, pinagsasama po si direct materials at si direct labor, and direct labor at si factory overhead. So, pag pinagsama natin si direct materials at si direct labor, ang tawag po natin doon ay prime cost. Consider sila as prime cost because these costs are needed in order to make the product. Kasi alam naman natin, hindi tayo makakapag-produce ng product kapag walang direct materials at hindi rin mako-convert ang direct materials into finished product kapag walang direct labor. Kaya pag pinagsama natin si direct materials at si direct labor, ang tawag po natin doon ay prime cost. However, another cost to consider is the combination of direct labor and the factory overhead. Ang direct labor and factory overhead, considered po yan as conversion cost. Conversion cost ang tawag sa kanila because these are needed in order to convert the direct materials into finished product. So, tandaan, direct labor plus factory overhead is equal to conversion cost. Direct materials plus direct labor is equal to prime cost. Kung hindi nyo siya masyadong matandaan sa gantong paraan, so meron naman tayong meme para dyan, di ba? So, direct materials plus direct labor is equal to prime cost. Then, direct labor plus factory overhead, we have the conversion cost. So, another cost na paano naman pag pinagsama-sama yung tatlo, I think na-discuss na natin dyan kanina. So, if direct materials plus direct labor plus factory overhead, ang sagot po din is yung manufacturing cost and also the product cost. So, ang kailangan nyo lang pong tandaan dyan, if direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead is equal to manufacturing cost, and direct materials plus direct labor is equal to prime cost, and direct labor plus factory overhead is equal to conversion cost. Just make sure or just be careful dun sa mga problem sa exam kasi minsan ang tinitrick nila dyan, what if prime cost is equal to conversion cost? Ano ba yon? Manufacturing cost? The answer is wrong kasi prime cost plus conversion cost, wala po yung nabubuong cost concept kasi ang prime cost, ang composition niya is direct materials and direct labor. Si conversion cost naman, ang composition niya is direct labor and factory overhead. So kapag ginawa po natin prime cost plus conversion cost, lumalabas na dodoble po si direct labor. So ibig sabihin wala pong cost concept na nabubuo doon. So sa mga problem, pwede po diyang itanong, what is the computation of manufacturing cost? Pwede yung prime cost plus factory overhead, and pwede rin naman yan conversion cost plus direct materials. Okay, another cost concepts to be familiar with is the period cost and the non-manufacturing cost under financial accounting. So ito naman na-discuss na ito sa inyong basic accounting under merchandising business. So ang kinaibahan lang po sa period cost at product cost, ang period cost po kasi once na i-incur mo to, hindi na yan napupunta sa ating inventory account, diretso na po yan dun sa ating other operating expenses. So for the sake of discussion, period cost, meron po tayo diyang 4 major components. We have the selling expenses, general and administrative expenses, finance costs, and others. So under selling expense, alam naman natin anything that is related to the distribution of the product. So ang tawag po natin doon ay selling expense. Example niyan is yung shipping cost or the delivery expense or yung commonly known as freight out, di ba? So under general and administrative expenses, ito naman po yung example natin dyan, yung salary ng ating accountants, administrative person, or kaya naman depreciation ng office equipment, and so on and so forth. So another cost na ma-encounter natin under period cost is the finance cost. Example niyan is yung mga interest expenses and the bank charges by the bank. And others, lahat ng hindi mo na-classify dun sa tatlo, ilalagay mo dyan dito. So, etc. Example niyan, tax expense, or etc. nga. So, or gain or loss on something. So, ilalagay po natin yan sa others. So, ito po yung cost na may encounter nyo under period cost, non-manufacturing cost. Okay, so let's proceed to the discussion of management accounting cost classification, specific as to the behavior of cost. As we all know, the ultimate goal of management accounting is to increase the wealth of the company by reducing its cost. And we cannot reduce cost if we can't control it. So in order to control the cost, ang goal natin first is to identify its behavior, di ba? So kapag alam na natin yung behavior ng cost, So, mas madali natin siyang makokontrol. So, meron tayong 4 dito na cost classification based on its behavior na pag-uusapan natin on the next slide. So, number 1, we have the variable cost. And number 2, we have fixed cost. 3, mixed cost. If we say mixed cost, it's a combination of variable and fixed. And we have the step cost. So, para magkaroon kayo ng onting viewpoint, pag ang graph po ng variable cost looks like this. So, diagonal siya na mag-start sa ilalim. Fixed cost naman, so diretso lang siya, line. Then mixed cost naman, so diagonal pero mag-start siya dun sa sa taas, 'di ba? Then step cost naman from the word itself, step cost, para siyang hagdanan. Okay, so let's proceed to the first cost. We have the variable cost. Variable costs are costs that change as the quantity of the goods or service that a business produces changes. So as per total, it varies depending on the activity level. Pero po sa unit, the amount remains constant regardless of the activity level within the relevant range. So the formula for variable cost in total is total variable cost is equal to activity times variable cost per activity. Since ang activity po yung ginamit nating term kasi hindi lang naman yan nagko-confine dun sa unit produce. Pwede po yan sa number of hours or sa number of delivery. So basta po activity, ita-times natin yun sa variable cost per unit, makukuha po natin yun yung variable cost. So variable cost, based dun sa ating definition, it varies on the level of activity. So ibig sabihin po, every time na mag-i-increase ang ating activity level, mag-i-increase din ang ating total variable cost. So based on the graph presented to you last slide, so ito po yung graph. Kung mapapansin nyo, yung horizontal line, it represents the units. Tapos yung vertical line, it represents the total amount. So, as the activity level rises, the amount also rises. So, ganyan lang naman po yung variable cost. Sa cost accounting, alam naman natin kung ano example ng variable cost. Kapag dumadami ang ating activity level, dumadami din yung cost in constant change. Ang example niyan is yung direct materials, direct labor. Doon naman sa ating operating expenses, meron tayong shipping cost. So, basta nakabari siya depending sa activity level, tapos yung per unit niya ay parehas lang, ang tawag po natin doon ay variable cost. Okay, so let's proceed to the next one. We have the fixed cost. So from the word fixed, ibig sabihin, so hindi yan nagbabago. So fixed costs, indirect costs, or overhead costs are business expenses that are not dependent on the level of goods or service produced by the business. So since it is not related to the activity level, so ang fixed cost in total po natin ay constant. Pero as per unit, since nga constant niya in total at ang activity level naman ay hindi naman niya nakadepende doon sa fixed cost natin, ang per unit po natin nakadepende po yan sa level ng activity. So the more activity level, the less the per unit ng fixed cost natin. So ito po yung graph, as you can see ulit kanina, yung ating horizontal line sa ilalim. Ito po yung ating units produced, tapos yung vertical line, ito naman yung ating amount. So regardless of the activity level, the total fixed cost is still the same. Pero kapag kino-compute natin yung per unit, since madami ang maghahati doon sa ating fixed cost which is constant, so mas maliit po ang per unit natin. So ayan po yung fixed cost. Ang example po ng fixed cost, ito yung mga rent expenses, depreciation of factory equipment. So lahat ng hindi nagbabago yung cost niya regardless of the activity level, considered siya as fixed cost. Okay, so let's go to the third one, which is the mixed cost. Mixed cost is actually a combination of variable and fixed. So yung iba ang tawag dyan semi-variable, yung iba naman tinatawag semi-fixed. Pero pwede rin naman silang tawaging mixed cost. So in management accounting kasi crucial na ihiwalay si variable cost tsaka si fixed cost. So as you can see on the graph, ganito po yung itsura ng mixed cost natin. So yung kung mapapansin nyo, ang unang cost na ina-incur nandun sa tumaas na kahit wala pang activity level. Kasi nga, combination siya ng fixed tsaka ng variable. So fixed siya as a certain level, then the amount changes depending on the activity level changes. So sa management accounting, sabi ko nga, crucial na ihiwalay si variable tsaka si fixed kasi nga most of the time ang fixed expense is considered as irrelevant cost. So most of them are not relevant for decision making purposes. That's why crucial sa atin na ihiwalay silang dalawa. So may binigay na guidelines ang ating book kung how to divide mixed cost or how to break down mixed cost into variable and fixed cost. So ang pinakamadaling paraan para ihiwalay sila is using the high-low method, and yung isa naman is yung least square method. And i-discuss na lang natin to sa susunod. Ang required lang naman natin malaman ngayon under mixed cost is that we need to separate the fixed cost from the variable cost. So ang method na gagamitin is yung high-low method, then yung least square method. Example po ng mixed cost na pwede nating i-relate dito is yung mga telephone charges or communication expense natin such as Globe or kaya naman Smart kapag tayo ay nakaplan, di ba? So kapag nakaplan ka sa Smart, you are required to pay a certain amount of money. Tapos kapag nag-exceed ka doon sa binigay sa yung data allocation, magbabayad ka ng extra money. So since nagbabayad ka ng extra money doon sa excess ng data allocation mo, so at a certain level, which is your plan, considered siya as fixed cost. Pero yung excess data allocation mo na ginamit mo using that phone, considered po yun as variable cost because it depends on the activity level. So if that's the case, combination siya ng fixed at variable, ang communication expense na nakaplan under Globe at Smart ay considered po yan as mixed cost. For management accounting purposes, required po to make a sound decision. Sabi nga natin kanina, ang fixed cost is irrelevant for decision-making purposes. So, ihiwalay po natin si variable at ihiwalay po natin si fixed. Ang gagamitin po natin dong method is yung high-low method and the least square method. Okay, so yung last part natin, which is the step cost. So, step cost from the word itself refers to the behavior of total cost of an activity at various level of the activity. So, this is the graph looks like. So, as you can see, step cost, so para po siyang hagdanan. So, ibig sabihin po, nag-i-increase lang ang ating cost sa certain activity level. So, hindi po yan every time na nagkakaroon ng change sa activity level, tumataas po ang ating cost. So, tumataas lang siya a specific activity level. So, ang example po niyan is yung salary ng ating mga factory supervisors. So, let's say sa isang factory, ang isang supervisor ay umahawak ng 50 factory workers. So, ibig sabihin, if the factory workers increase, so pag dumami ang ating mga factory worker, so ibig sabihin, dapat po dagdagan natin yung ating factory supervisor. Kasi nga ang ratio natin is 1:50. So kapag naging 100 ang ating factory worker, kailangan po natin ng dalawang supervisor. So ang salary ng supervisor is considered as step cost kasi nadadagdagan lang siya every time na nare-reach natin yung quota natin na 50. Kaya hindi siya pwedeng i-consider as variable cost kasi nga kapag nag-change lang naman ng ating factory worker ng dalawa, isa, hindi naman tayo tatanggap ng factory supervisor. So, magtatanggap lang tayo kapag na-reach natin yung quota ng 50. So, ibig sabihin, 50-50-50 is our activity level trigger. So, kapag na-reach natin yung 50 na yon, so mag-employ na tayo ng production supervisor or factory supervisor. That's why factory supervisor salaries expense is considered as step cost. Okay, another cost na kailangan natin pag-usapan under management accounting is based on planning. So marami pa pong cost na involved dito pero ang gusto ko lang i-discuss itong mga importante as of now since nag-i-introduce pa lang naman tayo ng cost accounting and concepts. So first cost na pwede nating ma-encounter under management accounting based on planning is the standard cost. So from the word itself, it's standard, it is a predetermined cost. So ibig sabihin, before the start of production, so nagsiset na kasi si management na tinatawag po nating standard cost in order to control the cost to be incurred. So let's say for example, ang business natin is making manufacturing of furniture. So yung log, bago ka bumili ng log doon sa mga supplier mo, so dapat meron ka na pong siniset na predetermined cost bago ka makipag-transact sa iyong mga supplier. Through that, you can control the cost na pwede nating ma-incur kasi kapag sobra yung ino-offer ni supplier, so pwede mo siyang hindi tanggapin kasi yung standard cost mo is only this much. So another cost, we have the relevant cost. Relevant cost is a cost that differs between alternative being considered. So if natatandaan niyo lang po pag sinabi natin relevant cost, kapag pinili mo yung isa, ito po yung matitipid mo kasi pinili mo to over the other. So example po niyan kapag umu-order tayo ng product or ng produkto sa or sabihin na natin sa GrabFood. Let's say for example, bumili ka ng food sa Jollibee, tapos iniisip mo kasi magpapa-deliver ka na lang ba or pupunta ka na lang dun sa store. So kapag pumunta kasi sa store, wala siyang shipping cost na ibabayad natin doon sa ating Grab driver. Pero kapag sa Grab ka, syempre meron po yung additional cost which is yung shipping fee. So yung shipping fee po, consider po yun as relevant cost kasi ayun po yung difference ng dalawang alternative. So pag pumunta ka sa store, walang shipping cost. Kapag pinag-grab mo yan, may shipping cost. So yung shipping cost na yon, considered siya as relevant cost because it is the difference between the alternatives being considered. Another one, we have the controllable costs. Controllable costs are those costs that can be altered in the short term. More specifically, a cost is considered to be controllable if the decision to incur it resides with one person. So, bibigyan ko na lang kayo ng example niyan. So, let's say, entertainment expense ng isang team. So, ang entertainment expense ng isang team is considered as controllable cost kasi nakadepende yan sa manager kung ibibigay niya yan dun sa kanyang mga tauhan. So, pwede kasing gawin ni manager to save money instead of incurring that obligation. So, let's say for example, instead na mag-out of the country ang buong team, pipiliin na lang nilang pumunta na lang sa Laguna. So, since yung cost na yon is controllable by one person, which is the manager, that cost is considered as controllable cost. Next, we have the sunk cost. Sunk cost refers to the money that has already been spent at which cannot be recovered. So, ibig sabihin po, kapag gastos mo na yung pera at hindi mo na yan mara-recover anytime, ang tawag po doon sunk cost. Sa management accounting, sunk cost is considered as irrelevant cost. Kabaliktaran po yan ng relevant cost kasi nga, wala na pong silbi yung decision-making process na yon kasi the cost is already incurred. So, sunk cost is also called past cost. The last cost na gusto kong i-discuss sa inyo is yung opportunity cost. So, opportunity cost is the loss of potential gain from other alternatives when one alternative is chosen. So, ang unique kay opportunity cost doon sa apat na discuss natin, ang opportunity cost is not actually an expense. So, from the definition itself, opportunity cost is the loss of potential gain from selecting the alternative than the other. So, ibig sabihin po, potential loss po yan. Hindi po, ay potential gain na nawala, kaya po siya considered as opportunity cost. So, example po niyan, let's say ikaw ay nag-aaral ngayon as a college student, pero pwede ka na rin namang magtrabaho sa labas as a working student, 'di ba? Mag-work ka na. So, pero mas ang pinagpipilian mo, mag-aaral ba ako full-time or mag-work ako as a working student? Kasi kapag nag-work ako ng working student, kikita ako ng ganitong amount. Kapag hindi ako nag-work, wala akong perang kikitain, so mag-aaral lang ako. So, ang opportunity cost dun po ay yung potential income mo na ma-generate sana kung ikaw ay nag-working. Kasi ang opportunity cost is not actually an expense but a loss of potential gain from selecting the other alternative from the other.